a little bit of a bleak outlook, but again, it highlights the importance of the data and analysis the Plant Atlas has done in confirming our suspicions of what we see on the ground and hopefully informing future things to address the issues. So we're passing over to Max online. Is she there?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay,
can you all hear me?
Yeah, shall I introduce you, Max?
Oh, go on then.
Yeah. So Max Cousins has been working in ecology and conservation for many years. She's currently the senior specialist for vascular plants at Natural England. Has also been involved with the Shropshire Botanical Society for 20 years, and she's the VCR for Shropshire along with John Martin. And she also has a keen interest in invertebrate conservation, especially molluscs, and is the conservation officer for the Conchological Society of Britain and Ireland. So over to you, Max, who is going to let us know how the data is going to be used.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to join this celebration. So we are a little bit behind schedule, and I think like all good weddings, we can blame that on the photographer. So I'm going to press ahead, but if I see you leaving the room, I'm not going to take it personally. So thank you for this opportunity to give me, for me to give you a view on how Natural England use the data and how it helps in delivering our work. Whatever I say in the next few minutes will be an understatement. It's actually impossible to cover the full range of circumstances where we use information on the ecology, status, distribution and trends in species. Well, I could, but you probably wouldn't thank me for going on so long that you missed your dinner tonight. So I've just pulled out a few highlights from my own work as vascular plant specialist at Natural England. I work with Alex Prendergast and Alex Mills, who I'm sure will join me in saying how thankful we are to have the BSBI doing what they're doing. So thank you to all the recorders right through to all the staff. So how does the data help us? Well, for a start, plant records are used directly for assessing potential SSSIs. Some of you may have seen me make this point before, but it is worth highlighting this incredibly important work area. We use rarity and threat status in the selection of SSSIs for plants, and we only know about the rarity and threat status by the work exemplified in the Atlas 2020 project and in the BSBI dataset, which is our go-to reference material. So this example is Swanwick Peninsula SSSI, which was notified quite recently in 2021. And the photo shows a swathe of one of the qualifying plant species, slender hare's ear, which is both scarce, being of restricted range, and is threatened. Incidentally, if anyone's interested in seeing those selection guidelines for SSSI, they are published on the JNCC website. So back to Swanscombe. There are 12 scarce plants at Swanwick Peninsula on the Thames estuary, 5 of which were deemed to qualify as notified plant species under the guidance. So we had slender hare's ear on the first slide, and that's one of 4 scarce and threatened species. So that falls under this criterion 411. In this category, there is also Bithynian vetch, and this photo captures its subtle beauty and is from the gallery on the Atlas on the website by Rob Still or Chris Gibson. And just to reiterate, the gallery contains a stunning collection of photos which I asked permission to use for this presentation, but generally as a resource to get to know your plants, it is fabulous. So here are the other 2 scarce and threatened species at Swanscombe. Yellow vetchling, nice to hear a mention there from the previous speaker as well, and divided sedge. Again, photo of the latter from the Atlas Gallery. So the guidelines also refer to whether or not the populations are sustainable at the site. So we do need information on population biology and habitat preferences, which is summarised in the Atlas accounts. And we also need to ascertain how much potentially suitable habitat is available and whether the populations are successfully regenerating, and therefore if the species can be regarded as sustainable. So that's at a slightly more detailed level of information. So just to say that the fifth and last qualifying plant species at Swanscombe is the round-leaved wintergreen, which is scarce but not threatened, so falls under a different criterion. And here there's even more emphasis on population size, because we need to know, is it the largest or only sustainable population in that area? So the BSBI Big Database is our go-to data set for more detailed records than the hectad or tetrad level shown on the atlas. And those showed that round-leaved wintergreen at Swanscombe had been persistently present for a long time at that site. So there are other sites in the SSSI pipeline with plant species, and we give the same level of detailed consideration to all of those in every situation. So that was a look at how plant data informs the selection of plants in SSSI designations, but another aspect of my work is assessing how well populations of rare, scarce and threatened species are currently represented in SSSIs. So we're doing a gap analysis led by the Alexes, my colleagues, starting with the location of critical species, that's England Red List critical, and whether or not the occurrence of those intersects with SSSIs, i.e. are the species contained within current boundaries of SSSIs? Well, many are, but what proportion, and is this sufficient coverage? Obviously, sufficiency depends on many different factors, including the nature of the threats, some of which Jonathan's talked about, and the ecology of the species. If there is very little coverage, would the species benefit by being included as a notified feature in those SSSIs, or are there opportunities to extend existing SSSIs or notify new sites to include these species? Please note that this doesn't necessarily mean that these will enter the notification pipeline, but at least it puts us as plant specialists in a more informed position. So here we have Micrantha Saxifraga nivalis, alpine saxifrage, which has a very restricted distribution in Cumbria. And here's the dot map from the atlas. Sorry. But it turns out that all these current localities in Cumbria are actually all currently within SSSIs. So with this gap analysis, we're also thinking about climate change, resilience and adaptation. And just to say, less than 72 hours after the launch on the 8th of March, questions came in to Natural England from high up in the policy making chain about impacts of climate change on our flora. And I was able to refer to Chapter 9 of the summary report, Britain's Changing Flora, Climate Change and Shifting Ranges. So these sorts of questions and the trends identified by these resources do have an influence on policymakers. It's not always obvious how messages get through, but they can and they do. So a slightly different use of the records, but also related to SSSIs, is condition assessment. So from the mountains of the northwest to the lowlands of the southeast, Amberley Wildbrook's SSSI in the Arun Valley has both individually notified vascular plant species and an assemblage associated with the ditch systems of the grazing marshes. So some of the important species at Amberley is cutgrass, which is a Schedule 8 species protected on the Wildlife and Countryside Act. Rare in Great Britain, endangered in England, having suffered serious declines. We've also got sharp-leaved pondweed, rare in Great Britain, endangered in England, part of the assemblage, but not individually notified, doing relatively well, I understand, in that region. And another one from Amberley Wildbrook's marsh fern, scarce in Great Britain, but least concern in England, part of the notified plant assemblage. So in order to do a condition assessment for these species and assemblages on SSSIs, we need to look at the atlas and DDB records or any other sources of data, including probably fresh survey data, to understand how populations are faring at those sites. So moving on directly from protected sites. One of the questions following the Atlas 2020 launch on the 8th of March was, how do we encourage government agencies to make use of the information? Well, just to reassure you, I don't need any encouragement. I know a good thing when I see it. One of my main tasks as a vascular plant senior specialist is to provide advice. So that might be internally or it might be externally. So this could be quite simple, basic level. What is this plant? Is it rare? Where does it grow? In which case I can simply direct the questioner to Atlas 2020 website, BSBI website. Great, job done, job's good. But before you question, is it actually worth paying me a salary? Requests for advice are usually more complex, relating to all sorts of different matters. Could be condition assessment, habitat management, setting up rare plant conservation projects, or priorities for nature recovery and species reintroductions, in which case all sorts of information play a part. We surely do stand on the shoulders of giants in the botanical world. So as a little example here of something slightly different, summer ladies' tresses, Spiranthes aestivalis, has an entry on the Atlas, albeit with one faded dot on the map. This species has been extirpated from Britain, a quote from the Atlas entry. But I am working with Fred Ramsey on defining favourable conservation status for the species, what good would look like. That's what the whole programme, the FCS programme, is about. The next step would be looking at feasibility for restoring species and habitats to favourable conservation status. There's already a statement for one of the rare species that's been done for plants, and that's marsh saxifrage. So that's published if you want to see that. So I could possibly summarize this next section as colouring in the dots, but that's a bit simplistic. We all love dot maps, but we don't like fading dots. We prefer increases in dots. So take Jersey cudweed as an example. Since 2000, there's been a 50-fold increase in the number of hectare records. So Jersey cudweed was first recorded in 1689 in Jersey. And over the next 2 centuries, it was pretty limited, found only in Brecon, Norfolk, Kent and Dorset. Many claiming it as native, but likely arrived and spread by humans, maybe also by birds. So mapped as a neophyte on the Atlas. And you can see the status for the hectare counts under alien there. So this is what it looks like. Rather beautiful, understated beauty. So interestingly, Jersey cudweed, as a Schedule 8 protected species, was featured in the original proposed species recovery programme, which started in Britain in 1990. And Lynn Farrell, if you're listening, will remember this. 350-page tome, which included more than 150 Schedule 8 plant species, all of which had costed recovery plans set out. The ultimate aim was that the protected species became a secure, self-sustaining member of the ecosystem, no longer in danger, and therefore could be removed from the Wildlife and Countryside Act schedules. So this was the recovery goal and prescription for Jersey cudweed back in 1990. So when at least 250 plants have been present at the existing site and 2 others for 5 years under appropriate management. Well, how times change. The recovery of Jersey cudweed, or spread, has definitely exceeded this target. And it has been proposed for removal from the Schedule 8 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. However, the reasons for its spread, as it says on the Atlas, might be due to warming climate, use of aggregates, horticultural inputs, as well as more intensive recording. So maybe not so much to do with species recovery actions then. So what about other species in the original recovery programme? How are we doing moving native plant species off the threatened list? So just to say that reducing extinction risk is one of the targets in the Environment Act 2021. To be more specific, the D5 Extinction Risk Indicator, the proper name being D5 Conservation Status of our native species. So this is something that is very much a live target now for government agencies and all of us, I guess. So, stinking hawk's beard, a checkered path back to recovery. Again, this was in the original recovery programme. The goal, as stated in 1990, 2 sites to have increased in number, at least over 150 plants over 5 years, etc. So what is the trajectory? What's the history been? So from extinct or thought to be so in 1980, reintroduced from seed to new sites in 1902, mostly died, then rediscovered in the wild, reintroduced to another shingle site, and with rabbit control now numbers in the thousands. Attempted reintroduction at 3 more chalk pit sites, all failed. But research has determined that it has not suffered a genetic bottleneck, good, and rabbit grazing control seems to be important. Okay, so what's the conclusion from this? Well, I think we could say the specific targets have been achieved, but it's perhaps not yet the sustainable and secure member of the ecosystem we would like. So perhaps still a case for needing assisted dispersal. So here's what it looks like, looking all cheeky and pleased with itself. So another example here, perhaps we could say from reintroduction to de-extinction. York Ragwort is a fertile hybrid between the neophyte Oxford Ragwort and the native common groundsel, Senecio vulgaris. An entry on the atlas states that it became extinct in the wild, last seen in 1991. Fortunately, it was grown ex situ, literally in window boxes. Seed was saved and it was introduced to 2 sites on the campus of the University of York, but it didn't survive. Perhaps the habitat was unsuitable. The few remaining seeds at Millennium Seed Bank were declining in viability, but fortunately enough remained to be grown on and seed bulked up rapidly and in quantity by Andy Shaw of the British Rare Plants Nursery. And then Alex Prendergast with York City Council and Network Rail have made a second attempt at de-extinction for York Ragwort by scattering seed in February this year in York City Centre alongside railway tracks in particular. So it's anticipated that the first York Ragwort plants for 32 years will flower in York in early May 23 and cast their seed about the city. So keep your eyes peeled if you go there this season. So in my final slide, here's my colleague Alex Mills carrying the weight of the atlas on his shoulders. And just as Atlas carried the weight of the celestial sphere on his shoulders, together we shoulder the responsibility for the botanical sphere. And the atlas itself was an immense collaborative effort. And so will be the recovery of species, as my examples show, so many partners involved. So I look forward to working with you all on further projects, and please carry on botanising. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. I'll first of all ask Jonathan if there's any online questions.
Not at the minute.
Not at the minute. And does anyone in the room have a question for Max? No. Well, thank you, Max. I'll concur with Max that for those of you who don't know me, I'm a conservation officer for the Wildlife Trust in Cambridgeshire, and a large part of my work is looking at county wildlife sites, which are similar to the SSSI system. And I will now use the plant atlas, but also the BSBI database, and the publications that have stemmed from those, like the red data lists and the plants of conservation concern. I use them on a daily basis to assess sites and to re-evaluate the criteria for which we select county wildlife sites. So thank you for that data, for all of you for producing that for me to use.
Can I just ask,
Yep.
Max, whereabouts in York?
Okay, there's a question, Max. I don't know if you heard it. Whereabouts in York, specifically?
Yeah, it was mainly focusing on beside the railways and a few sort of verges. I think it's probably best if you want really specific locations that you contact me afterwards.
Okay, yeah.
Is that okay? Who was the question? Sorry, I missed that.
So
Me, Kay McDowell.
Kay McDowell. Thank you, Kay.
I'll
Okay,
share
well,
my
we've got-
Natural England email.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Max. We move on to the final talk of the day, which is from David Roy, who's worked at the Biological Records Centre since 1995 and is currently the head. He's been that